Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of The Last of Us. It was called Left Behind. It shares that name with a DLC that came out for the original game sometime after the original The Last of Us game came out. DLC, of course, is downloadable content, and in this case, it was a standalone, I guess you could say, chapter in the Last of Us story. It was a couple hours worth of gameplay, and this episode, appropriately, is taken just about directly from the events of that DLC, which focuses on the same basic story as the episode. So anyway, let's get into that. At the end of last week, Joel was injured, which again happens in this DLC. Ellie has taken him to an abandoned house where she's trying to care for him, trying to keep him from dying. And it doesn't seem like there's very much she can do. Now, in the original DLC, this scenario unfolds in a shopping mall in Colorado. So that's one change that they made. Anyway, realizing that there isn't too much she can do, Joel urges her to leave him and go back to Tommy. And when she walks off, seemingly to do just that, just as she's about to touch a doorknob, we get a flashback to a time when she was in the Fedra school. And she was being bullied by a girl who mentions that her protector, another girl, it would seem, isn't around anymore. She ends up fighting the bully and going to the disciplinarian, who tells her she's too smart to be in trouble all the time and that she should lean into it and become an officer so that she can be the one to boss around the bullies. Later, in her room at lights out, a girl comes through her window, and it turns out to be her friend Riley, the aforementioned protector, who had briefly run away to become a firefly, it turns out, about which they kind of argue. Riley asks Ellie to go somewhere with her for some fun, and after resisting the idea, she decides to go with her. They make their way through some alleyways and a building and come across a fresh dead guy just before the floor under him gives way and he falls through it, much to their amusement. On the building's roof, they share some alcohol that the guy had on him, and Riley lets Ellie hold her gun. They talk about how Riley connected with the fireflies, how she came to be involved with them. And then they jump from roof to roof a few times until they arrive just across from a shopping mall, but this one's in Boston, which they soon enter, as Riley explains that Fedra unknowingly turned the power back on to the mall when they turned power back on for another part of the grid that they needed power for. Naturally, Ellie's never been in a mall before, and she was absolutely fascinated with the electric stairs. They make their way to part of the mall where there's a pretty big carousel that's all lit up and functional, which of course they ride as they drink more of the alcohol. After a few minutes, the ride stops and they move on to a photo booth and take some photos before moving on to the arcade, where they raid the change machine for quarters and play Mortal Kombat 2.
Finish him!
After a little while, in a shop not too far away from the arcade, an infected wakes up, apparently because it could hear them making so much noise. Unaware of this, they move on to the food court, where Riley reveals that she's been staying for a bit and that she has a gift for Ellie, which is the second edition of a pun book for which she had the first edition. And I think it's the same pun book that she was using in the earlier episodes when she was telling Joel those goofy jokes. But then Ellie finds some pipe bombs that Riley's been stashing and gets upset, thinking that the Fireflies plan to use them in the QZ, where she lives. As she walks off, clearly upset, Riley chases her to let her know that she's being posted away from Boston by the Fireflies and that she brought Ellie out for this adventure because she wanted to say goodbye. So Ellie says goodbye and continues to walk away, starts to cry before turning around and going back, at which point she hears screaming, which she thinks is Riley, but which is just a Halloween decoration, in a store where Riley was just sitting on the floor, where Ellie joins her. They talk about how Riley feels at home with the Fireflies because they feel like a family to her, like the family she used to have. And the pair smooth things over before moving on to one last thing. They both put on Halloween masks and listen to Ellie's music from her Walkman on the store's stereo system and proceed to dance on a countertop in the store. After a few minutes, Ellie takes off her mask and so does Riley, at which point Ellie asks her not to go. Riley says, okay, and then they kiss right before they're attacked by an infected, which doesn't stop attacking them, even though Riley shoots it. And after Riley gets knocked down, Ellie is forced to fight it off herself with just a knife. But it doesn't go well until Riley gets back up and hits it, at which point it goes after her, and Ellie has to kill it by stabbing it in the head. But of course, it bit both of them while they were fighting it. After this reveal, we flash back to the house, and we see that Ellie turns around and runs into the bathroom of the house, rummaging through the cabinets, and then does the same thing in the kitchen, looking for something to help Joel with. We then flash back again to the mall as Riley and Ellie try to figure out what they're going to do now that they've both been bitten, and they're both very upset. They toss around the idea of using Riley's gun to take themselves out, but decide not to do that because Riley says that would be the easy way out, and that what they should do instead is just continue on for as long as they have, live every moment that they have, and if they end up going mad together, then so be it. And they end up holding each other and crying. And then we flash back to the house. Ellie manages to find a needle and thread, at which point she goes back to Joel and begins to sew up his wound without any anesthetic, having decided not to give up after all. And that's where the episode ended. I have to say that I think this episode was fantastic. I know some people are going to say it was boring. It was just a lot of talking. There was only one infected in it. It wasn't very actiony. And what is the show doing and so forth. But I've said this a bunch of times, and I'm going to say it again. This story is not about zombies. It's about people. It's about human beings. It's about how we persevere through trauma and crazy circumstances. The point of this show is not to give you thrills and chills with zombies and action, just like the game wasn't made for that reason. The point of this show, as was the point of the games, is to make you feel things, is to make you think and ponder your humanity and ponder your mortality and go through a range of emotions: fear, terror, which is different from fear, joy, sadness, heartbreak. That's the point of this game. And that should be the goal of any good media, to make you feel something, to put you through your emotional paces, to put you through mental paces, not just to entertain and not just to thrill. A bad piece of media can do that: a bad video game, a bad comic book, a bad TV show, a bad movie. Good media, TV shows, movies, video games, etc., should be a robust experience. You should come away from it moved emotionally, blown away by it in a way that almost defies words. And that's what this show has consistently done. And it does it again in spades with this episode. Not only that, but it fortifies the Ellie character. She talks about loss in a previous episode. And this shows you what she was talking about, what she lost. Clearly, these two characters were in love with each other, or were very fond of each other, and definitely loved each other, whether it's in love or whatever you want to call it. And as we know, Ellie survived the bite because she's immune, but Riley didn't because she wasn't. And so, it goes to that perfect thing where, people will say, show me, don't just tell me. I think even I said it last week about one show or another. I don't remember which show. It might have been this one. That's exactly what this was. The previous week, she told you that she had lost people. This week, they showed it to you. It deepens your understanding of the character. It deepens your connection to the character. It draws you in deeper and makes you care more about the character and wanting to see her persevere. The other important thing that it points out in this episode is, the difference between people who are sort of content to be under the thumb of Fedra, or under the protection, quote unquote, of Fedra, and to live that life, and people who are not content with it and who want to rebel against it. Because, through the whole episode, there's sort of a back and forth between Ellie and Riley where, not just at the end when she finds the pipe bombs, where they're kind of at odds over, should the Fireflies be doing what they're doing? Is it wrong that Riley has joined the Fireflies? The two characters kind of feel differently about that whole thing than each other. And the argument that they have at the end has kind of been brewing through the whole episode. And it's only when Ellie finds the pipe bombs that it really gets serious. But it didn't come out of the blue. They're sort of bantering about it through the whole episode, and you can kind of tell that they disagree. And that's important because it's been coming up so far. Are the Fireflies good guys or the bad guys? Are Fedra the good guys or the bad guys? Tommy joined the Fireflies, but then left. Joel didn't join the Fireflies, but he also doesn't have any love for Fedra. So it's part of the fabric of the story. And so there was an element of that. And I thought that was cool. Of course, the overall point was you can't give up. And we see her remember this and refuse to give up on Joel, even though he's pushing her away, and go back to save his life, which is what she did. She pushed on, she kept searching for a way to help him, and she found one. And that's what good media does. It teaches you something, in addition to all the other things that I said it would do. So this episode was just fantastic. Now, it was different from the DLC because, like I said, in the DLC, she's trying to help him not die in a mall in Colorado, which is part of what triggers her memory of the mall in Boston. She finds a medical kit in a helicopter that's crashed to the roof of the mall. And that was a crazy part of the DLC. I kind of remember that. And in the DLC, as she's going around the mall, she's fighting off an infected here and there, as well as some not infected people that are rummaging through the mall and that she has to hide from and deal with. They left that out. There's only so much you can do in an hour because, of course, the DLC took longer than that to play through. And they really wanted to focus, obviously, on the main part, which is the events between Riley and Ellie. So I was glad that they made those changes. I don't think that the young ladies playing these two parts could possibly have done a better job of acting in this episode. The whole way through, you feel like they've known each other forever. And they've only worked on this one episode together. But it really feels like they're connected in a big way, like they have a history. You can feel it in their performances. You can feel how much they care about each other when they look at each other. Especially the young lady who plays Riley. There was so much love in her eyes through this whole episode that it was unbelievable. They just did excellently, and I think they both deserve nominations, Emmys for this episode. I think Ellie's going to end up getting one for the season, but this young lady did an excellent job in a supporting role that played Riley, and I think she really deserves an Emmy. I absolutely do. That's really all I have to say. I thought this was a fantastic episode for a number of reasons. As I've said, I think the actresses did a fantastic job, and I'm looking forward to the final 2 episodes of the season. I, of course, will be back to review the next one once it's released. For now, I'm going to get out of here. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.